When the sound of a shattering flower pot exploded at the entrance of the alley, I was standing in the shadows around the corner. Fragments of broken porcelain splattered against the bluestone slabs, startling two sparrows perched under the eaves. Immediately following was the sound of footsteps, disordered and urgent, surging from the direction of the backyard. Zhou Fu's voice arrived first. "Who goes there?" "Surround them." Only then did I hear Xie Ce's muffled groan. It was very soft, sounding as if he had been pinned against a wall and struck with a blunt fist. The metallic screech of clashing blades rang out only twice before coming to an abrupt halt. The assassin had fled. I remained motionless against the corner of the wall until Zhou Fu ran to Xie Ce's side with a lantern, his voice cracking, "My lord. Where are you hurt?" Qinggu tugged at my sleeve from behind, her voice kept extremely low. "Madam. Are we not going over?" Xie Ce leaned against the wall, his left arm hanging down as blood dripped from his fingertips. His face was as white as paper in the lantern light, his lips pressed into a tight line, yet his gaze pierced past Zhou Fu's shoulder, pinning directly onto where I stood. He knew I was there. I took 2 steps forward, stepping out of the shadows. My hem swept across the broken porcelain, making a faint, grating sound. Xie Ce stared at me for a breath's time, then looked away and said to Zhou Fu, "It's just a superficial wound, nothing serious." The assassin fled to the west. "Take men and pursue." Zhou Fu nodded repeatedly, then looked at me hesitantly. "Madam, are you all right? There are shards all over the floor." "I am fine." I looked down at the porcelain fragments by my feet, my voice flat. It was I who kicked over the flower pot. The air fell silent for a moment. Xie Ce's gaze returned to my face, heavier than before. Zhou Fu opened his mouth, looking back and forth between me and Xie Ce, seemingly trying to smooth things over. The madam heard a noise and came specifically to. I couldn't sleep, so I came out for a walk. I heard a sound in the alley and was afraid some stray cat or dog had knocked something over, I said unhurriedly, lifting my eyes to look at Xie Ce. I didn't see the path clearly as I walked by and accidentally kicked over a flower pot under the corridor. The words were spoken flatly, without a single ripple of emotion to find fault with. Xie Ce stared at me for a long time, so long that Zhou Fu had to urge him again, "Marquis, please return to your room to bandage the wound first," before he finally withdrew his gaze and said in a low voice, "Let's go back." Zhou Fu hurriedly called over 2 young servants to support him. I stepped aside to clear the way. As Xie Ce passed in front of me, he paused for a moment. The blood on his sleeve brushed against the back of my hand, feeling warm. "You heard it," he said. His voice was very soft, as if he were afraid of being overheard, but there was no hint of a question in his tone. It was a statement of fact. I looked up at him, neither confirming nor denying it. He shook off his servant's hand and walked into the courtyard on his own. Qinggu didn't dare breathe until he was far away. She leaned in and whispered, "Madam, just now. Why didn't you say you went there specifically to save the Marquis? You clearly heard the commotion." "Save him for what?" I said, turning to walk back. "He took so many guards with him to the banquet. There's no place for an inner chamber woman like me to go playing the savior." Qinggu followed behind me, looking as if she wanted to speak but held back. I knew exactly what she wanted to say. The last time Xie Ce was ambushed, I had rushed out to the mouth of the alley shouting for help. The assassins were startled away, but I was struck in the chest by a sword hilt Xie Ce had parried, leaving me bedridden for half a month. Afterward, Xie Yinshan wiped away tears in front of Xie Ce, saying, "Thank goodness I called for help in time," leading Xie Ce to believe it was Xie Yinshan who had first heard the commotion that night. From then on, my name was never mentioned in his book of merits. This life is different. I was the one who kicked the flower pot, and I was the one who summoned the people, but I don't need to stand in front of him and take a blade for his sake. I only needed to ensure that Zhou Fu happened to pass by the alley at that exact moment. Back in the room, Qinggu helped me remove my outer coat. When her fingers brushed against my left wrist, she let out a soft gasp. "Madam, why is your hand so cold?" I did not answer, instead withdrawing my hands into my sleeves. My fingers were indeed trembling, and they hadn't stopped since the moment I stepped out of the shadows. Memories of that night in my past life overlapped with tonight, the glint of the blade, the warmth of blood splashing onto my face, and the look in Xie Ce's eyes when Xie Yinshan later sweetly called him brother. Those images crowded my mind like a spilled box of broken pearls rolling everywhere. But I let nothing show on my face. Prepare the water, I said. I still have to deliver the medicine to the Marquis early tomorrow morning. Qing Wu froze. The Marquis didn't say you had to. So I'll go by myself. The next morning, when I brought the medicine bowl to the door of Xie Ce's study, I heard Xie Yinshan's crisp voice ringing out from inside, "Brother, you have no idea." I woke up the moment I heard that flower pot shatter last night. I wanted to get up and call for help, but I was afraid of making a mistake and ruining things, so I had to run to find Butler Zhou first. Luckily, I made it in time. Why do you think that assassin chose the back alley of our house, of all places? I didn't push the door open. Holding the tray, I stood under the corridor and listened through the door panel. Xie Ce remained silent for a long time before finally saying, "It must have been hard on you." Xie Yinshan's voice took on a soft, wheedling tone. "As long as you're all right, brother." I was so scared I couldn't sleep all night. I lowered my eyes and shifted the tray to my other hand, my fingertips slowly tracing the rim of the porcelain bowl. In my past life, she had used these exact same words verbatim. The only difference was that back then, I was lying bedridden, and there was no one to speak up for me and say, I was the one who cried out first that night. Now, I am standing right here. I raised my hand and knocked on the door, my voice neither too loud nor too soft. "Marquis, the medicine is here." The voices inside abruptly fell silent. After a few breaths, Xie Ce's voice finally drifted out, "Come in." I pushed the door open and entered. Xie Yinshan was sitting on an embroidered stool just below Xie Ce. She was clutching a handkerchief in her hand, and the smile on her face froze for a moment when she saw me enter, though it quickly rippled out again. "Sister-in-law is here. I was just telling brother about what happened last night." "You must have heard the commotion too, didn't you? Were you frightened?" The question was asked lightly, as if she were concerned for me. But I knew her objective. She wanted to establish the narrative before I could speak, making Xie Ce believe that she was the first one to react last night. I placed the medicine bowl on the side table next to Xie Ce's hand and glanced at Xie Yinshan as I straightened up. Today, she wore a lotus root-colored jacket, her hair combed neatly, looking quite spirited. In my previous life, she had worn this exact outfit when she came to curry favor on this day. I remembered it all too clearly. "I heard it," I said, withdrawing my gaze with a flat tone. "But I didn't realize it was an assassin. I thought it was a stray cat knocking over a flower pot." "It's a good thing you were so clever, sister, knowing to go find Steward Zhou." Xie Yinshan's smile faltered slightly. She hadn't expected me to follow her lead, let alone patch up the logical inconsistencies in her story about running to find Butler Zhou. She blinked twice, and then her smile grew even sweeter. "You flatter me, sister-in-law. I was just acting on impulse in the heat of the moment." Xie Ce suddenly spoke up. "You were the one who kicked the flower pot?" He was asking me, but his gaze was fixed on Xie Yinshan's face, as if searching for which of the two accounts was more credible. I met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. I was passing by the alleyway and didn't see where I was going, so I knocked one over. Then I heard Butler Zhou calling for help and realized something had happened." Xie Ce's fingers tapped twice on the tabletop, very slowly. I watched his fingertips, remembering how, in my past life at this very moment, he had held my hand as I brought him medicine and said, "You've worked hard." Then, he turned around and rewarded Xie Yinshan with a pair of jade bracelets. The events separating these two lifetimes are like a river. I stand on the opposite bank, watching him with absolute clarity. "Brother?" Xie Yinshan sensed the atmosphere was off and called out cautiously. Xie Ce did not respond to her, only saying to me, "Just leave the medicine there." Go back and rest. I curtsied and turned to leave. As I reached the threshold, I heard Xie Ce add from behind me, "That flower pot from last night, where was it originally placed?" I didn't stop my pace. That flower pot was originally placed at the innermost part of the corridor, several steps away from the entrance of the alley. I kicked it over specifically to ensure Zhou Fu could hear it from that exact position. If Xie Ce wanted to investigate, he would know at a glance that the flower pot shouldn't have been there. But I didn't turn back to explain. As the door closed behind me, Qingwu peeked out from behind a pillar, her eyes wide with shock. "Madam, the second miss. How could she claim that she was the one who went to find Steward Zhou first?" "Let her speak," I said, stepping down the stairs as the morning light spilled diagonally across the bluestone ground. Since I spoke on her behalf, she naturally has to own it. Qingwu stamped her feet in frustration. "But she's clearly lying. Last night, while you were standing at the mouth of the alley, the lights in her room weren't even on." "Qingwu," I interrupted, turning my head to look at her. "Just because she said it doesn't mean others will believe it. Some words cannot be stolen. It's simply a matter of when they are returned." Qingwu stared at me blankly, as if she were seeing me for the very first time. I stopped speaking and walked toward the front courtyard. Behind me, I heard the study door being pushed open again, followed by Xie Ce's low voice. "Zhou Fu, where exactly was that flower pot originally placed under the corridor last night?" The corners of my lips curled upward, unseen by anyone. After lunch, Qingwu returned from outside with a grim expression. As soon as she entered the room, she lowered her voice. "Madam, Butler Zhou has moved all the flower pots under the corridor. He's questioning the night shift servants one by one, asking who touched that pot of roses yesterday." I was leaning by the window, flipping through an old ledger. Hearing this, I didn't even look up. Did he find out anything? "They say no one touched it. That pot of Chinese roses was originally placed at the very back of the stone steps, far from the alley entrance, and there were shards of porcelain embedded in the cracks of the bluestone slabs. Steward Zhou crouched there inspecting it for a long while." Qingwu bit her lip. "Madam, if the Marquis finds out that you were the one who moved that flower pot there on purpose." "So what if he finds out?" I turned a page of the account book, my fingertip tracing a line of figures. "Must I report to someone just to move a flower pot in my own courtyard?" Qingwu opened her mouth, seemingly finding the logic sound yet sensing something was amiss. Ultimately, she just gave a muffled yes and stepped aside to grind ink for me. In the evening, Zhou Fu came to my courtyard in person, carrying a lacquer tray. Upon it sat a bottle of medicinal ointment and a small plate of osmanthus cakes. His face wrinkled into a smile as he spoke. "Madam, the Marquis said you were startled last night, so he sent me to deliver this soothing balm. There are also some freshly made pastries from the kitchen for you to try." I glanced at the lacquered tray but didn't take it. How did the Marquis' investigation into the flower pot go today? Zhou Fu's smile stiffened for a split second before quickly returning. "You must be joking, madam. There was no investigation to speak of. The Marquis was just asking in passing." "Steward Zhou." I closed the account book and looked up at him. "There's no need to play games with me. When the Marquis asked you about the flower pot, how did you answer?" Zhou Fu rubbed his hands together, hesitating for a moment before lowering his voice. "This servant told the truth, that the flower pot was originally placed inside the stone steps but was moved to the corridor at the entrance of the alley in the middle of the night. The Marquis didn't say anything after hearing it. He only told me to deliver the medicine." He paused, then added, "Madam, you know the Marquis' temperament. He doesn't show it on his face, but he sees everything clearly in his heart. If you have anything you wish to explain to him, now would be the time." "There is nothing to explain." I stood up, took the bottle of wound medicine from the lacquer tray, and turned it over in my hands. I was the one who moved the flower pot. If the Marquis asks, just relay those words to him exactly as they are. Zhou Fu was stunned, clearly not expecting me to admit to it so bluntly. He opened his mouth as if to offer advice, but upon meeting my gaze he swallowed his words, bowed, and retreated from the courtyard. Qinggu tugged at my sleeve in a panic. "Madam! Why did you admit to it yourself? Isn't this as good as telling the Marquis that you were standing at the entrance of the alley at the time?" I was indeed standing at the entrance of the alley. There is no reason not to admit it. I placed the medicine back onto the lacquer tray, sat down again, and flipped open the account book. He asked about the flower pot, not what I was doing at the time. If he truly wishes to ask about anything else, he will come in person. Xie Ce did indeed come. At the hour when lamps were lit, the courtyard gate was pushed open from the outside without any announcement. Xie Ce stood under the porch wearing black casual robes, his left arm wrapped in gauze, his face devoid of expression. Zhou Fu followed behind him, shrinking his neck and shooting me a look, signaling that he had already delivered the message. I rose to pay my respects, but before I could speak, Xie Ce spoke first. "You were the one who moved the flower pots." It was a statement, not a question. "Yes." I straightened up and met his gaze. I was afraid the potted rose on the veranda might be blown over by the night wind and hit someone, so I moved it to the mouth of the alley against the wall. Moved it to the alley. Xie Ce repeated those words, enunciating each one clearly. "You didn't sleep in the middle of the night just to go move a pot of roses?" "I couldn't sleep," I said. The Marquis had not yet returned from the banquet, and I have always been a light sleeper. I got up for a walk, saw that the pot was unstable, and moved it in passing. Xie Ce stared at me, his gaze sweeping across my face inch by inch, as if trying to find some flaw in my expression. I didn't flinch, nor did I deliberately meet his eyes. I simply stood there calmly, letting him look. The silence lasted for a few breaths. Then Xie Ce suddenly let out a laugh, extremely soft and devoid of any warmth. "Last night you told me you kicked over the flower pot because you couldn't see the path clearly. Tonight you say you moved it there specifically because you were afraid the wind would blow the flowers over. Ouyang, did you fail to see it, or did you move it on purpose?" It was a pointed question. When the two explanations were placed side by side, they sounded contradictory to anyone listening. Behind me, Qinggu had already held her breath, and even Zhou Fu quietly took half a step back. But this contradiction was exactly what I wanted. I moved the flower pot, and I also kicked it over. I followed his lead, my tone showing not a hint of panic. "What your lordship wants to ask, I fear, is not about the flower pot. Your lordship feels that I should have shouted for help the moment I heard the commotion, rather than standing at the mouth of the alley waiting for Steward Zhou to arrive." Xie Ce's brow twitched slightly, but he remained silent. "But I didn't recognize them as assassins at the time," I continued, my voice neither high nor low. "I thought it was just the Marquis returning to the manor with heavy footsteps, perhaps having kicked something over. By the time I realized something was wrong, Steward Zhou had already arrived with his men. Does the Marquis believe I should have rushed into the alley screaming while knowing nothing of the situation? What if I had been mistaken and disturbed the Marquis, what then?" I had prepared these words in advance. My tone was steady, neither humble nor arrogant. Every sentence offered an explanation, yet none showed weakness. Xie Ce remained silent for a long time, long enough for the candle flame to flicker twice and for his shadow on the ground to stretch and retract, before he finally spoke. "What you say makes sense." His tone was flat, making it impossible to tell whether he believed me or not. "However, do not wander alone at night from now on. Have Qinggu accompany you." He finished speaking and turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. Without looking back, he dropped one last remark. "Yunshan came to me this evening and said that last night, the moment she heard the commotion, she went looking for Zhou Fu. Yet Zhou Fu claims he only went out after hearing the sound of the flower pot shattering. You say she went to find Zhou Fu, but Zhou Fu says he never saw her. Which one of them is lying?" Standing in the candlelight, I watched Xie Ce's retreating figure and slowly curled my lips into a smile. Finally, he asked. Why doesn't the Marquis call for your sister and ask her in person? I said. What she told you doesn't match what Steward Zhou said. It only stands to reason that there should be a confrontation. Xie Ce did not look back, but I saw his fingers, clasped behind his back, curl slightly. Fine, he said. Tomorrow morning, we shall confront each other in the study. As the door closed behind him, Qingwu's legs gave way and she nearly collapsed, her voice trembling. Madam. You are putting the second young lady over the fire to be roasted. The Marquis prizes his reputation above all else. If it is discovered that the second young lady lied, it won't be me who discovers her lie. I sat back down by the window and reopened the ledger. She put herself on that rack. I merely lit the fire for her. Qingwu stared at me blankly, appearing as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she only whispered a single question. Madam, in the past, you never concerned yourself with such matters. The hand I was using to turn the page paused for a brief moment. In the past, I indeed did not care. In my previous life, when I lay on my sickbed listening to Xie Yinshan claim the credit, I didn't even have the strength to speak. By the time I regained the strength to open my mouth, everyone had already accepted the second miss saved the Marquis as an ironclad fact. Anything I said would have been in vain. This life is different. The past is the past, and the present is the present. I kept my eyes lowered, my fingertip tracing the entry for the extra 50 taels of silver Xie Yinshan had withdrawn this month, funds she had taken privately from the communal accounts. The steward hadn't dared to stop her because of her merit in saving the Marquis, and everyone in the household deferred to her. The advantages some people have taken must be paid back, one by one. The candle wick crackled and popped. I lifted my eyes, gazing out at the heavy darkness of the night. The charcoal fire in the study was burning a bit too intensely. A wave of heat rushed to meet me as I pushed the door open. Xie Ce sat behind the desk, his left arm resting on the armchair, wrapped in fresh, blindingly white gauze. 2 cups of tea were set before him, one steaming hot, the other already cold. It was clear he had been waiting for some time. Xie Yinshan arrived earlier than I did. She was seated in the first chair on the lower side, clutching a handkerchief in her hand. Seeing me enter, she stood up with a somewhat strained smile. Sister-in-law, you're here. Brother called us here first thing this morning, saying he wanted to straighten out the events of the other night. I was just thinking, things happened so suddenly that night, it's possible I remembered it wrong. She spoke with calculated ambiguity, carving out a retreat for herself beforehand. I glanced at her but didn't respond. I simply gave Xie Ce a formal salutation and took the seat opposite her. Xie Ce's gaze swept back and forth between the two of us before he spoke. His voice wasn't heavy, but every word was clear. I questioned Zhou Fu last night. He said he rushed over from the backyard only after hearing the flower pot shatter, and he didn't encounter anyone on the way. Yinshan, you told me yesterday that you went to find Zhou Fu first and then went to the alleyway together? The handkerchief in Xie Yinshan's hands tightened for a fleeting moment, but the smile on her face remained unchanged. Brother, did I say that yesterday? I must have been in such a panic that I didn't speak accurately. I heard the commotion first and intended to find someone, but halfway there I heard Steward Zhou's voice, so I just followed the sound to meet him. Went to meet me? Xie Ce's fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop. Where exactly did you meet me? At the mouth of the alley. Xie Yinshan answered quickly, her voice crisp and clear. When I arrived at the alley, you were already leaning against the wall, brother, and Butler Zhou was sending men to chase after the assassins. You weren't there when I reached the mouth of the alley. Xie Ce interrupted her, his tone flat. When Zhou Fu helped me up, I looked around. There were only the 2 servants he brought with him. When exactly did you arrive? Xie Yinshan's smile finally froze for a fleeting moment. She shot a quick glance at me, seemingly weighing how to respond. I sat upright, looking neither at her nor at Xie Ce, my gaze resting quietly on my folded fingers in my lap. I might have arrived a bit late, so it's normal that brother didn't see me clearly at the time. Xie Ce's voice dropped a few notches, but she was still holding her ground. But I really did go. Sister-in-law can testify for me. Yesterday morning, she even said I was quite clever. She finally dragged me into this. I had been waiting for this sentence all morning. I lifted my eyes to look at Xie Ce, my tone steady and unhurried. Sister told me last night that she went to find Steward Zhou after hearing the commotion, and I believed her at the time. However, since the Marquis just mentioned that Steward Zhou didn't see her, I find it strange as well. Why don't we call in Steward Zhou and the servants who were on night duty, and question them one by one to get things clear? Xie Ce's expression shifted for a split second. She hadn't expected that I would take the initiative to propose a confrontation. Xie Ce looked at me for a few moments, then jerked his chin toward the door. Zhou Fu, come in. Zhou Fu pushed the door open and entered, followed by two young pages around 12 or 13 years old, one tall and one short, both keeping their heads bowed, not daring to look up. Zhou Fu was hunched over, sweat trickling down from his temples. He knew that getting through today would not be easy. Xie Ce didn't beat around the bush, asking directly, Zhou Fu, tell me once more. Before you heard that noise that night, did anyone come looking for you? Zhou Fu wiped away his sweat, his voice steady in reply to the Marquis, no. I had just finished patrolling the backyard and was preparing to return to my room to rest. When I reached the passageway, I heard a crashing sound and immediately led men toward the mouth of the alley. It was quiet all along the way. I didn't see a single soul. Xie Ce gripped her handkerchief tightly and interjected with a smile, Steward Zhou is getting on in years. Perhaps he simply didn't notice someone standing in the shadows of the corridor. Second young lady. Zhou Fu looked up, foregoing his usual role as a peacemaker. I have served in the Marquis' manor for 20 years, and my hearing has always been sharp. If you had come looking for me, even if you had called out from a distance, there is no reason I wouldn't have heard you. These words were heavy, equivalent to a direct slap to Xie Ce's face. The smile on her face completely crumbled, the corners of her mouth dropping into an expression of both grievance and panic. Brother, what does Steward Zhou mean by this? Do you think I would lie to you? Where are the people from your courtyard? Xie Ce's voice was not loud, yet it cut her off. Who was on night watch in your courtyard? Call them in and ask if you stepped out that night. Xie Ce's face finally turned pale. The maid on night watch in her courtyard was a girl named Suiping. Xie Ce hadn't stepped out at all that night, and if Suiping were called in for questioning, the truth would be out instantly. I watched her pale fingertips twisting her handkerchief back and forth, my heart feeling perfectly calm. In this life, she hadn't yet learned how to handle such a situation. In the previous life, after she claimed credit for the deed, Xie Ce never once questioned her. Because she held the shield of being his savior, no one dared to probe deeper. Now, before that shield could even be raised, all her flaws were exposed, riddled with holes at the slightest poke. Brother! Xie Ce suddenly stood up, her voice rising a few notches as her eyes reddened. You believe Steward Zhou over me? I am your own sister. Would I make up a lie about something like this? I did go out that night. I heard a commotion and ran outside, but it was so dark that I might have taken the wrong path, which is why I didn't run into Steward Zhou. By the time she reached the end, she was becoming incoherent, realizing she had let a slip of the tongue escape. If she had taken the wrong path, it meant she never reached the entrance of the alley at all, a direct contradiction. Xie Ce looked at her, the cold scrutiny in his gaze seeping out inch by inch, as if he were seeing his sister's usual tricks clearly for the very first time. I spoke up then, my voice as flat as a bowl of cold water. My lord, I have a matter, though I know not if it is my place to speak. Xie Ce looked toward me, speak. If my sister had stepped out of her courtyard that night, the soles of her shoes should be stained with mud. It rained just 2 days ago, and the stretch of bluestone path leading from the back corridor to the alley entrance is still damp. A round trip would inevitably leave traces. Why not have someone inspect the shoes she wore last night? By comparing the depth of the mud stains on the soles, we shall know whether she truly walked that path. As these words left my lips, a deathly silence fell over the room. Xie Ce whipped her head around to look at me, the panic and shock in her eyes nearly overflowing. She hadn't expected me to use a shoe sole to shut her up. In truth, she hadn't stepped foot out of the house that night, so the shoes were clean. And it was precisely because I knew they were clean that I dared to make such a claim. Xie Ce fell silent for a moment before turning to Zhou Fu. Go to her courtyard and bring the shoes she wore last night. Brother! Xie Ce's voice nearly cracked. You would really do this to me? I am your sister. Precisely because you are my sister, Xie Ce said, looking at her with an unreadable expression, I must find out exactly who is lying. Zhou Fu received his orders and left. Xie Ce stood in the center of the room, the color completely drained from her face and her lips trembling slightly. She looked at me, and a sliver of hatred suddenly stirred within the panic in her eyes, as if she had abruptly realized something. After Xie Ce questioned her about the flower pots last night, she must have thought I was the one cornered, and she must have expected today to be a spectacle at my expense. But Xie Ce, sitting behind the desk, was waiting for Zhou Fu to return, while I was waiting for the moment the account books would serve their purpose. I hadn't revealed my final card yet. The mud on the soles of the shoes was merely the appetizer. Sister-in-law, Xie Ce suddenly spoke to me, her voice kept so low that only I could hear. What are you doing today? How have I offended you? Must you drive me into a corner like this? I looked into her eyes and did not answer. When Zhou Fu pushed the door open and entered, his hands were empty. With an awkward expression, he glanced at Xie Ce and then at me before finally bowing to Xie Ce to report, My lord, the servants at the second young lady's courtyard said that the shoes she wore yesterday were washed this morning and are still drying on the veranda. The corners of Xie Ce's mouth finally curled upward slightly. But before that sense of relief from a narrow escape could fully surface, she heard me set down my teacup. The porcelain base met the tabletop with a soft clack. It's just as well that they were washed, I said. The mud stains from freshly washed soles would still be soaking at the bottom of the basin. Have someone bring the water from that basin? By checking for sediment, we will know whether those shoes touched the ground last night. Xie Ce's smile froze on her face. Xie Ce looked at me, and for the first time an indecipherable glint flickered in the depths of his eyes. He didn't stop me, only uttering 2 words to Zhou Fu, fetch it. When Zhou Fu entered carrying a bronze basin, Xie Ce took a half step back. The water in the basin was murky with a faint grayish-white tint, clearly having just been used to wash something. Zhou Fu placed the bronze basin on the open floor in front of the desk and stole a cautious glance at Xie Ce. My lord, this is the water used to wash the second young lady's shoes. I brought the whole basin. Not a single drop was spilled. Xie Ce stood up, walked around the desk, and looked down at the copper basin. A thin layer of fine silt had settled at the bottom, yellowish in color, clearly the kind of wet mud that accumulates in the cracks of bluestone slabs after rain. His gaze lifted from the bottom of the basin and fell upon Xie Ce's face. Xie Ce's lips trembled. She wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The small sense of relief she had felt from surviving the ordeal was now completely shattered, cleaner than the broken flower pot. She stared at the thin layer of mud in the copper basin as if watching her last shred of dignity being stripped away. These shoes were only washed this morning. Xie Ce's voice dropped even lower, becoming heavy. Last night's mud is still soaking in the basin. You told me you went out and took that path, so where is the mud from your soles? The water you washed them in is clear. Did you walk on bluestone, or was the ground paved with rice paper? Xie Ce let out a sudden wail. It was the cry of someone driven into a corner with no way out. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup, yet she still forced her voice to hold out, brother. I was afraid you'd blame me. That night I heard a noise and wanted to go out, but it was too dark and I tripped. When I got up, I couldn't find my way. I'm not lying, I really wanted to go find someone. Thinking about going and actually going are 2 different things. Xie Ce retreated behind the desk and sat down again, his fingers slowly tapping on the armrest. The day before yesterday, you told me you went to the entrance of the alley. Just now, you said you went there to meet someone. And now, you claim you took a fall and lost your direction. 3 different stories, which one do you expect me to believe? Xie Yunshan's sobbing hitched for a moment. I glanced at the handkerchief she was clutching tightly, then at the thin layer of mud in the copper basin, and finally at Xie Ce. There was no obvious anger on his face, nor even disappointment. There was only a flat, level indifference. That kind of coldness was more chilling than rage. It signified that his trust in this younger sister had completely collapsed from this moment onward. My lord, I spoke up, my voice low. There is something I shouldn't have brought up today. But since we are discussing whether my sister went out or not, I think it's better to clear everything up at once. Xie Ce looked at me, his brow twitching slightly. Speak. I took a thin booklet from my sleeve, turned to the dog-eared page, and pushed it across the desk toward him. There was no writing on the cover, but the open page clearly listed several entries. The 15th of this month, 20 taels of silver withdrawn, recorded as purchasing rouge and powder. The 18th of this month, 15 taels of silver withdrawn, recorded as acquiring autumn clothing. The 22nd of this month, 15 taels of silver withdrawn, recorded as donating incense oil to the temple. A total of 50 taels. The signature area was covered entirely with Xie Yunshan's private seal. Xie Ce looked down for a few moments, then raised his eyes to look at Xie Yunshan. The indifference in his gaze finally cracked, revealing the underlying layer of emotion. Yunshan, you withdrew 50 taels from the public funds in a single month? Xie Yunshan's sobbing came to an abrupt halt. She stared at the ledger, her pupils shrinking suddenly as if a basin of ice water had been poured over her head. She opened her mouth, her voice as dry as sandpaper rubbing against wood. Brother. That was, mother said I could withdraw it first and make it up later. Your mother's monthly allowance is 12 taels. Xie Ce closed the ledger, his fingertip pressing against the cover. The two of you combined receive less than 30 taels. You withdrew 50 taels in 1 month, make up for what? With what? Xie Yunshan was completely silenced. She stood there, tears still wet on her face, but her entire body seemed like a rag doll with its bones removed, teetering on the brink of collapse. She suddenly turned to look at me, the hatred in her eyes so thick it almost seemed to spray out. Sister-in-law. How long have you been hiding this ledger? You've been waiting for today all along, haven't you? You moved those flower pots last night just to lure Steward Joe over there. You did this on purpose. She practically screamed the latter half of her sentence, her voice rising sharp and piercing, echoing off the walls of the study. Xie Ce's gaze shifted to me. He didn't interrupt Xie Yunshan, simply watching me quietly as if waiting for my answer. I knew Xie Yunshan would try to implicate me at a time like this. Driven into a corner with no way out, she would inevitably try to drag me down with her, because dragging me down was the only thing she had left to do. But she was wrong. Yes. I met Xie Ce's gaze, neither flinching nor hesitating. I moved the flower pot there on purpose. The study fell silent for a moment. Xie Yunshan froze, clearly not expecting me to admit to it so bluntly. She had assumed I would deny it or make excuses, which would have allowed her to seize upon the point and make a scene. But I gave her no such opportunity. That night, I heard a strange noise in the alley and wasn't sure if it was an assassin. If I had shouted rashly and alerted them, the Marquis would have been in even greater danger, I said slowly, enunciating every word. So, I moved a flower pot from the veranda to the entrance of the alley and kicked it over. Once Butler Joe heard the noise, he was bound to lead men there to investigate. It was far more secure than rushing in and shouting for help myself. Xie Ce looked at me, the scrutinizing look in his eyes gradually transforming into something more complex. He didn't speak immediately, as if he were weighing my words over and over in his mind. Xie Yunshan shrieked, "Look!" She admitted it herself. It was a setup. She deliberately led me into a trap. A setup? Xie Ce finally spoke, his voice not loud but enough to suppress all of Xie Yunshan's noise. What setup did she orchestrate? If she hadn't moved those flower pots that night, Zhou Fu wouldn't have arrived so quickly, and this bleeding arm of mine would have taken more than just one blade. The person you should be questioning is yourself. You didn't even step out the door, yet you ran to me claiming you went to the alleyway and saved me. Who exactly was orchestrating a setup? Xie Yunshan's lips trembled twice as tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. She looked at Xie Ce, realizing for the first time that in her brother's heart, her life-saving favor had already been shattered to pieces. Brother, I was wrong. She finally yielded, her knees buckling as she knelt down. I just wanted you to praise me so badly. I knew sister-in-law was there that night too, I was just afraid you would only praise her and not me. She cried miserably, with a touch more sincerity than before. Yet, as I watched her tears, my heart remained completely unmoved. In my past life, she had cried just like this while I lay in bed coughing up blood, wiping away tears in front of Xie Ce as she said, "Sister-in-law was injured just to save you." My heart aches so much for her. Back then, Xie Ce had held her hand and told her, "You are a good sister," while I listened from behind the screen, lacking even the strength to lift my quilt. Get up, Xie Ce's voice was cold. Leave. The 50 taels from the accounts will be deducted from your monthly allowance starting this month until it is paid back in full. This matter ends here. Xie Yunshan scrambled to her feet and walked out with her head bowed. As she passed me, she paused for a moment and glanced at me sideways. There was no trace of crying left in that look. It was filled entirely with humiliation and venom. In a voice only I could hear, she whispered, "Sister-in-law, you won this round. But the days ahead are long." I did not look at her, nor did I respond. After the door closed behind her, only Xie Ce and I remained in the study. The water in the copper basin still sat quietly on the floor, the murky silt slowly settling to the bottom. Xie Ce remained silent for a long time before finally speaking. "How many more accounts do you have in your possession?" I looked up at him. His gaze was fixed on the ledger, his fingertips still pressing down on the cover. "Quite a few," I said. "Would you like to see them, Marquis?" Xie Ce didn't say whether he would look or not. He just stared at me, the complex emotions in his eyes slowly settling until they became a deep pool whose bottom remained obscured. Ouyang Lingyi. He called me by my full name. You weren't like this before. I kept my eyes downcast and did not respond. The surface of the water in the bronze basin finally stilled, the silt all sinking to the bottom, leaving a clear layer of water reflecting the light from the window. Gazing at that shimmering reflection, I remembered that in my previous life, he had never once called me by my full name. "If you wish to see them, my lord, I shall have the remaining ledgers delivered tomorrow." I stood up, gave him a formal bow, and turned toward the door. "Lady Ouyang," his voice called out from behind me. I did not look back. "That night," he paused, "did you go there specifically to wait for me?" I stood by the door, my fingers resting on the frame. A wind had picked up outside, making the branches beneath the eaves rustle softly. Watching the swaying shadows of the trees, I remembered that the night he was attacked in my past life had been just like this, the wind whipping my sleeves into a frantic flutter. I had screamed until my voice broke at the mouth of the alley, blood seeping from my chest and staining half my robe crimson. In this life, no one knows what was going through my mind as I stood at that corner that night. "Just passing through," I said. I happened to be passing through. Then, I pushed open the door and walked out. Qingwu hesitated 3 times as she brought dinner into the room. Finally, after setting the table, she couldn't hold it back any longer. "Madam," after the second miss returned, she caused such a scene with her crying and shouting that it alerted the old madam. "The old madam just sent word that she wants you to go to Rangon Hall tomorrow morning. She has questions for you." I picked up a piece of green vegetable with my chopsticks, ate it slowly, and then replied, "I understand." Qingwu rubbed her hands together anxiously. "The old madam dotes on the second miss the most. She'll likely try to stand up for her this time. Madam, you pushed the second miss too far today. Although the Marquis pointed out her fault to her face, the old madam won't be so easy to deal with. What's the rush? I set down my chopsticks and took a sip from my teacup. It's a good thing she started the fuss first. The bigger the scene she makes, the better. Qingwu froze. A good thing? I didn't explain further, only telling her to pack up the account books and bring them to Rondon Hall tomorrow. As Qingwu retreated while clutching the stack of ledgers, she was still muttering about how the old madam is not to be trifled with. Listening to her fragmented whispers, I was reminded of the scene in my past life when the old madam punished me. Back then, Xie Yinshan was the benefactor of the Marquis mansion, and everything I said was wrong. With a single sentence from the old madam, "You shouldn't have tried to steal credit," I was placed under house arrest. I was locked in my courtyard for an entire month, and Xie Ce never came to see me once. This life is different. The things that need to be brought to light, I have kept them all. The next morning, I entered Rondon Hall. Before I even stepped over the threshold, I heard Xie Yinshan sobbing coming from inside. She was crying even harder than yesterday, her voice cracking as she wailed, "Sister-in-law did this to harm me on purpose," and she even finished auditing the accounts just waiting to catch me in a mistake. Accompanying her was the concubine in the dark purple jacket, Xie Yinshan's birth mother Auntie Lu, who wiped away tears while chiming in, "Old madam, you must seek justice for Yinshan. She is only 16. How could she have the ability to embezzle any silver? Clearly, someone has long disliked her and set a trap for her to fall into." I stepped over the threshold and looked up to see the old matron leaning against the arhat bed, a blanket draped over her knees, staring grimly at the doorway. Auntie Lu and Xie Yinshan sat on either side of her, one wailing and the other wiping away tears, their coordination seamless. Xie Ce sat in a chair on the other side, his expression indifferent and unreadable. His gaze lingered on me for a brief moment before shifting away. "You've arrived," the old matron spoke, her voice heavy and muffled. "Kneel." I did as I was told, my knees landing on the cold gold brick floor, my spine held perfectly straight. The old matron watched me for a few breaths before saying, "I know everything that happened in the study yesterday. Yinshan was in the wrong, but you shouldn't have used such methods to coerce her. She is your sister-in-law. As her elder brother's wife, is there anything you couldn't have discussed calmly? Did you have to humiliate her right in front of the Marquis?" Auntie Lu sobbed as she chimed in from the side, "Indeed, Yinshan is still young. Even if she drew some silver, it was just out of playfulness. There's no need to make such a scene." I knelt on the ground, not rushing to defend myself. I waited until they had finished speaking before looking up at the old madam, my voice steady and unhurried. "The old madam is right. It is no great matter that my sister drew 50 taels out of playfulness. However, those 50 taels in the ledger are merely the smallest sum she has taken over the past 2 years. The old madam's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" I looked toward Qingwu. Qingwu immediately stepped forward and placed the stack of ledgers she was carrying neatly onto the side table next to the old madam. Book by book, they piled up to half a foot thick. These are the account books for the Marquis' estate from the past 2 years. Every single expenditure has the handler recorded. The silver withdrawn by my sister and those in her courtyard, the fabrics they took, the items they pawned, I have transcribed a copy of every single one and organized them into these records. I paused for a moment. If the old madam does not believe me, she may verify them on the spot. The room fell silent for a moment. The tears on concubine Lu's face had not yet dried, but her mouth had already snapped shut. Xie Yinshan stared blankly at the stack of ledgers, a trace of something real, fear, mingling with the hatred in her eyes. The old madam silently flipped through the first 2 pages. After reading a few lines, her expression changed. The further she flipped, the tighter her grip became. By the time she reached the 4th volume, she suddenly looked up at concubine Lu. "Last December, you withdrew 80 taels, claiming it was for Yinshan's coming-of-age ceremony. I recall the expenses on the list were only just over 20 taels. Where is the rest of the silver?" Auntie Lu's mouth opened and closed, the color slowly draining from her face. Furthermore, in the autumn of the year before last, there was an entry for purchasing winter charcoal totaling 70 taels. However, the Marquis Manor receives its winter charcoal in a unified delivery at the beginning of the month. The public accounts have never made a separate purchase. I knelt on the ground, my voice steady. Looking back even further, the monthly reports for replenishing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones from my younger sister's courtyard have consistently been 3 times higher than elsewhere, yet I have never seen a single extra unfinished book in her room. Xie Ce finally couldn't take it anymore. She lunged to her feet, pointing at me and screaming, You had all of this investigated long ago. You weren't checking the accounts for brother at all. You were deliberately waiting for this day to ruin me. Sit down. The old lady's voice suddenly rose, her palm slamming onto the side table with such force that the teacups jumped. Xie Ce shuddered in fear, forcing herself to swallow the rest of her words. The room was so quiet that only the sound of heavy breathing remained. Xie Ce hadn't uttered a single word from beginning to end, but I noticed his fingers resting on the armrest had loosened, as if a great burden had been lifted. The old madam finished flipping through the last volume. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the ledger. She looked at Auntie Lu and Xie Ce, then at me, and finally let out a long, heavy sigh. Lingyi, you may stand up. I stood up. My knees were somewhat numb, but I did not rub them. The old madam stared at the stack of ledgers for a long time before she spoke, her voice sounding much older. How much do these silver amounts add up to in total? Altogether, it amounts to 423 taels of silver, I said. In addition, there is a set of celadon jade brush washers, 2 gold filigree bracelets, and a bolt of cloud brocade. These are items my sister said she was borrowing for a few days but never returned. I have tracked down their whereabouts. The pawnshop receipts are still in my hands. Concubine Lu's face turned completely ashen. The old matriarch closed her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. Yunshan is grounded for 6 months starting today, and her monthly allowance is suspended. As for the Lu woman, go to the Buddhist hall in the backyard to reflect on your actions. Do not come out without my word. Xie Ce finally broke down. With a thud, she fell to her knees, clutching the old matriarch's sleeve and wailing, Grandmother. I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. Please let my mother out, I'll admit to everything. The old madam ignored her and turned to look at Xie Ce. Xie Ce nodded, stood up, and walked out. As he passed by me, he paused for a moment, his voice kept very low. The quite a few you mentioned last night, it truly was quite a few. I turned my head to look at him. A faint, almost imperceptible smile finally appeared on his face. It was nearly invisible, but it was certainly there. Come to my study tomorrow, he said. Sort through the remaining ones as well. Then he left. Concubine Lu was seized by 2 elderly maidservants and dragged out of Rondon Hall. Xie Ce remained kneeling on the ground, still crying, her wails sharp and desperate, one after another. The old madam leaned back on the Luohan couch with her eyes closed, looking as if she had aged several years in an instant. I turned around to leave. As I reached the door, Xie Ce suddenly looked up and shrieked at me, Ouyang Lingyi. Retribution will find you. I paused for a moment, but did not look back. Retribution? In my past life, I took that knife for her and lay bedridden for half a month without a single soul checking on me, while she took all the credit in front of Xie Ce. In this life, I am merely reclaiming one by one the things she stole from me. Qinggu followed me out of Rondon Hall. Only after we had walked a long distance did she dare to ask in a low voice, Madam, is it all over? I didn't answer, but looked up at the sky. The sun had risen, casting a warm glow across the blue brick floor of the veranda. Xie Ce told me to go to the study tomorrow. The household accounts have only just been opened to the first volume, with many more pages waiting for him to review. As for the events of my past life, those things that cannot be recorded in ledgers, they too will be settled one by one, sooner or later. Seeing that I didn't respond, Qinggu pressed further. Madam, what should we do next? Back to the courtyard, I said, stepping down the stairs. Find the archives from previous years as well. If the Marquis wants to see them, we can't very well give him only half the story. Qinggu was stunned for a moment, but then her eyes lit up. She took a few quick steps to catch up with me and went off at a trot. It is spring now. The old plum tree in the corner of the courtyard has shed all its blossoms and a layer of tender green buds has emerged on the branches. The story ends here. Thank you all for your company, and see you in the next one.